Hi. So I saw the new Indiana Jones movie the other day, and it was. Yeah, this isn't a movie review. But it did get me thinking about how important George Lucas and Harrison Ford's collective masterpiece, The Raiders of the Lost Ark, was in me becoming an archaeologist. I'm like 117% sure that if it wasn't for my parents introducing me to the Indiana Jones franchise at the age of 5, then I would not be studying archaeology. I distinctly remember one marathon that I watched on my Polaroid portable multi-format DVD player. I missed dinner. I didn't sleep that night because I was so infatuated with the story. I even liked Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I was like a diehard indie fan as an 8-year-old. One thing about becoming an actual archaeologist, though, is that you're acutely aware of every false or overly dramatized or pseudo-archaeological thing that they made up to make those movies more interesting. But that's showbiz, baby. Obviously, I'm capable of abstract thinking and I can suspend disbelief for long enough to watch Harrison Ford. And I'm still a motherfucking diehard Indiana Jones fan. You simply cannot argue with me about this. Like, these movies, this is cinema. This is a go to the theaters, watch a film movie. So anyway, recently, the 5th Indiana Jones film came out, and it follows an 80-year-old Indiana Jones and Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I did not know she was in this movie. When she showed up on screen, I'm trying to emulate her, but I don't think it's working. Personally, I relate to old man Indiana Jones the most. So Phoebe is the granddaughter of Indy, and she kind of drags him out of his grumpy old man ways for one last final adventure. It's pretty cute, but she turns out to kind of be like selling artifacts on the black market, and Indy's like, no, this belongs in a museum. Classic Indy. Anyway, I'm not here to give you a whole movie summary. That's not my job. Instead, I want to dissect the actual archaeological merit of this film, and most of all talk about the Antikythera. The Antikythera, or Dial of Destiny as it is cinematically dubbed in this film, is the main driver of the plot of the 5th Indiana Jones movie. And like with all Indiana Jones movies, the Nazis want an ancient artifact and Indy's just not going to let that happen. Rob Graves punched Nazis, that's like his whole thing. So the Antikythera mechanism is a real artifact, and it was found in the wreckage of an ancient Roman cargo ship off the island of Antikythera in Greece in 1902. It was pretty immediately picked up that it was a geared mechanical device which displayed calendars and astronomical information, and it's actually been labeled as the world's earliest analog computer. So it's a pretty cool feat of mechanics, especially for this time. So the Antikythera mechanism was like this shoebox type thing. The dial itself fit into like a wooden box. Essentially, a lot of the dating on this artifact has to do with what else was found on the shipwreck, and there have been coin-based dates within a few years of 60 BC. This isn't the only thing we have to go off of, though. There are actually accounts by Cicero in De Republica where he describes an item that works similarly to the Antikythera mechanism, and he describes having sighted it en route to Rhodes in his youth. There are like 20 or so ancient references to these astronomical mechanisms made between the period of like 50 BC to 500 AD. So the mechanism is usually placed around the like earliest mark of that time. Although, and if you watched Indiana Jones, you might be thinking, wasn't this made by Archimedes, who was alive in the 200s BC? In our little moving picture, yes, the mechanism is attributed to Archimedes, the ancient Greek mathematician. And Indiana Jones and Phoebe Waller-Bridge end up traveling back in time to meet him and say, oh my God, look, at your machine, it works, and it's time travel. I do not think the Antikythera was supposed to be a time travel machine. The true creator of the mechanism is unknown, and its origin is even widely speculated. It's usually dated to between 70 BC to 50 BC, around 200 years after Archimedes' lifetime. However, the level of complexity needed to create a mechanism like that would suggest that it had predecessors and was not a unique object. So although this one might have been manufactured in 60 BC, it could have had lots of previous iterations and could have potentially, although we have no real evidence, something like it could have been around in Archimedes' time, but there's no evidence that he created it. So what is it? If it's not a time-traveling machine, like the Dial of Destiny will have you believe, then what is it for? The mechanism was an astrological calendar. It calculated and displayed different celestial information, as well as the phases of the moon and the times for solar and lunar eclipses. Ancient calendars were often used to help with agriculture, knowing when to plant things. They could have been for religious festivals, and the eclipses and movements of the planets were often interpreted as omens. The Antikythera mechanism predicted solar and lunar eclipses based on the Babylonian arithmetic progression cycles. So a model made of this mechanism shows you a little bit more clearly two of its main functions. The upper spiral represents the Metonic cycle, which is 235 months, equaling 19 years, while the lower spiral measures 223 months of the Saros cycle, which is used to predict eclipses. The reconstructed gears represent the theory of Hipparchus, who was an astronomer who explained the moon's irregular movement across the sky. Andrew Ramsey, a physicist who specializes in imaging software, was responsible for photographing the surface of the dial like 1 billion times with a very fancy machine to create a 3D image of the dial to try and like look inside of it and see how it works. This is where Ramsey found out that he was not just just looking at the gears and the stuff inside of it, but he could also see letters inscribed into the dials. And he's quoted as saying, "I felt a bit like Indiana Jones. I knew right away that the text was astronomical, as there were names of stars and planets that I recognized from my physics classes, but I couldn't understand much of it." Ramsay should have been cast in this movie. Ramsay was snubbed from Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. From analyzing these inscriptions by someone who knows Greek, ancient Greek, it's clear that the outside of the box, there was like an instruction manual on how to use the mechanism. I have a quote directly from the box. "This, and under the of the extremity, and is carrying a little golden sphere. The point of the protrudes from it carries, if which the next one which is carried through a Venus. The extremity of the point stands a little golden sphere away towards the sun above. The sun is, when it moves through its orbit, and is moving through, the spiral divided in 235 sectors and days to exclude it. The one indicates the 76 years, 19 years of the 223 coming together so that the whole will be divided." So, the ramblings of a lunatic. Obviously, we don't have the capacity to understand this fully, and we also don't have the full inscriptions because it's thousands of years old. Erosion, you know. But smart people have deduced this is kind of like an instruction manual on what, when the calendar is pointing in a specific way, what that means and what that's representing and what you can read it as. Some inscriptions are preserved a little better on the back of the mechanism, which explain the locations and patterns of constellations. So you can see here a list of constellations like Gemini and the Pleiades, which are being talked about and are being mapped. The descriptions of these constellations would align the location of the origin of this mechanism within the latitudes of 33.3 to 37.0 degrees north. This, coupled with the fact that the shipwreck the mechanism was found on was carrying Rhodesian-style pottery and ceramics, makes many people think that the Antikythera was made in Rhodes, hence the bee earrings. Another option is that the mechanism was made in Corinth. It's currently believed that the calendar being represented on the mechanism is the Epirote calendar, which originates in Corinth, and so the mechanism is probably Corinthian. And I know what you're thinking. If you watch the movie, if not, you're like, why do you keep talking about the movie? I just want to hear about the green. But in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, obviously they trace the mechanism back to Archimedes, which means they trace the mechanism back to Syracuse, which was where Archimedes was born and lived. And you might be thinking, okay, well, Syracuse was a Corinthian colony, so then there is a link between the calendar and Archimedes, which even then, that's a pretty small link. But I have evidence to believe that the calendar is not from Syracuse because although Syracuse was a Corinthian colony, they had a different calendar. Personally, me, I'm a big fan of calendars, so the Syracusan calendar has a couple months that do not exist on this calendar and vice versa. I'm not going to go super in detail because this is actually insane. Like, I read a paper where someone was dissecting like the letters and how much space they took up to try and see which months were being recorded on different calendars to try and put the Antikythera mechanism into a specific calendar. It was beautiful and amazing, but I don't want to misinterpret anything about that paper, so I'll put it if you want to read it. Like, it was actually really cool. I'm still personally on the Rhodes train though, because I love Rhodes and I believe the stars. And Rhodes was a very, very booming astronomical hub at this time. Hipparchus lived there, who we talked about earlier in the video. If you remember him, he did all of the astronomy stuff. And also the dial was most likely set to the festival of Halalia, which took place in Rhodes. And yeah, for me, that's all I need. For you, maybe something else. So essentially, in Indiana Jones, the Nazis want the artifact because they want to go back in time and help Hitler win the war. And in this reality, I suppose the Antikythera is the key to time travel. Indy and Phoebe Waller-Bridge end up time traveling and they meet Archimedes. And honestly, the whole movie was a little bit ridiculous. Like, I said I was a diehard Indiana Jones fan, but I can't really defend this one. But the scene where they travel back to ancient Syracuse and Indiana Jones like almost dies and wants to be left in the ancient world is kind of nice. Like, I personally relate. So how archaeologically accurate is this film? I'm going to go with a 0 because they do time travel, and archaeologically speaking, that's yet to be proven. That's also not what the Antikythera mechanism is for. It is a calendar. And yes, it was made to potentially predict celestial movements, but it's a bit of a stretch. I'm going to go with the fact that it's a bit of a stretch to go from this is when the solar eclipse is coming and this is when our festival is, to I'm going to time travel. So if I'm going to rate this film's archaeological merit from ancient apocalypse to Kunk on Earth in terms of bullshit and correct, I would put it at a strong 3. It's definitely very much based in reality, but there's still a horse in a subway. You know what I mean? Hold my horse. The one thing that I mainly don't like about this is that they made it from Syracuse. You could have made it from Rhodes. There are cool people in Rhodes. They could have gone back and met Hipparchus instead of Archimedes, and it would have made more sense because Hipparchus is more likely to have worked on something like this than Archimedes, and he was alive closer to its actual creation date. And also, why was the Antikythera in New York? I mean, that's not that unplausible. That is quite a plausible part of the movie. The actual Antikythera mechanism now is located in Athens, in the Archaeological Museum of Athens, which I've been to. But it is plausible that it would be elsewhere, i.e. the States, or even more plausible, England. But Indiana Jones doesn't live in England, so he's American. That's like his whole thing. Punch Nazis, rob graves, be American. That's it. If you have any questions about the Antikythera, or look them up, I don't know. But also, I thought it might be fun to do like a little bit of a deep dive on all the Indiana Jones movies and see how real they are. Because this one, honestly, kind of up there with the most plausible. Like, a lot of the Indiana Jones movies take place around fictional artifacts, and this is actually a real artifact, so I found that cool. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is sitting in the back of Indiana Jones' class, and she's like, the Antikythera. I was like, what? That's a real thing. Unlike that silver skull that melts your face. You know the one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for 700 subscribers. That was pretty cool to see. Peace be with you and with your spirit.